Hello and welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us once again. We'll be speaking with Dr. Ahsan Arozullah. He's joining us here as Senior Vice President, Head of Oncology Development at Astellas. He's going to talk about the company's presence at the 2023 ASCO annual meeting, the expanding portfolio of approved and investigational cancer therapies, and how the research underscores the company's focus on pursuing targeted therapies for those hard-to-treat cancers where few therapies exist. Welcome to Health Professional Radio. Ahsan, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Neil. Nice to be with you.
Give us a little bit of background. Tell us briefly what led you to Astellas.
Sure, Neil. I am a physician by training, and I went through my own residency training and did some additional fellowship work in clinical investigations and clinical science, and came to the pharmaceutical industry about 15 years ago. And actually landed at Astellas both in the drug safety group as well as the clinical development group. And I've really had the privilege of working at Astellas over these years in watching us develop our oncology portfolio. And this past ASCO meeting in 2023 was kind of highlighting a lot of the work that's been done over these last 5 to 10 years in building out our pipeline. But I've been at Astellas for some time and really take a lot of pleasure and a lot of pride in what we've been able to accomplish here.
You mentioned, and of course I did too, this year's ASCO meeting. What were the key presentations that were highlighted at this year's ASCO?
We had, I think, 3 key data presentations that I'd like to highlight for our listeners. The first one is an investigational phase 3 study called the GLOW study. And this was a global pivotal study that read out for our Claudin 18.2 targeted monoclonal antibody known as zolbetuximab. And so this was a positive study in first-line treatment of patients with Claudin 18.2 positive unresectable or metastatic gastric cancer. And so this was a positive study, and this was kind of a sister study to another positive study, the Spotlight study that read out earlier this year. This had been a plenary presentation during this past year and had a repeat encore performance at the recent ASCO meeting. The other 2 presentations were with enfortumab vedotin, which is a drug that is currently approved for bladder cancer. And one of these studies that we presented data about was actually taking enfortumab vedotin and actually treating it directly into the bladder of patients. It's a different formulation. And this is the first data readout from a first-in-human study looking at the utility of using enfortumab vedotin in this manner for very early-stage bladder cancer. And a second study using enfortumab vedotin was looking at advanced head and neck cancer, actually a completely different type of cancer from what we've studied previously. And this showed some encouraging data in this set of patients, again, with some significant unmet needs. As
far as Astellas Oncology portfolio goes, explain the significance of this data that was presented.
Sure, Neil. In gastric and gastroesophageal cancers, we recently announced positive data for both of our phase 3 studies of zolbetuximab. And these studies were named Spotlight and GLOW. And we've also recently filed a BLA filing to the U.S. FDA and recently received priority review. So this application is currently under review right now. The significance of these findings was that this was the first Claudin 18.2 targeted therapy in combination with chemotherapy that's actually shown improvement in overall survival and progression-free survival for patients with advanced gastric cancer. And so this was a really significant finding for both of these studies showing these positive results. In prostate cancer, Astellas, along with our partner Pfizer, recently shared very positive data from the phase 3 EMBARK study. And this was presented as a plenary session during the 2023 American Urological Association annual meeting back in April, earlier this spring. And this study evaluated Xtandi plus leuprolide versus placebo plus leuprolide or Xtandi monotherapy in men with a very early stage of prostate cancer that's known as non-metastatic hormone-sensitive prostate cancer who had a high risk of biochemical recurrence. And these findings demonstrated that Xtandi plus leuprolide seemed to have significant benefit for this population.
Now, it's my understanding that Astellas' approach to oncology research and development is rather unique. Can you expand on that unique quality of your company?
Sure. I would say our uniqueness is kind of categorized into three pieces. First piece is looking at different modalities to attack cancer cells. We can appreciate that in cancer research now, many folks are looking at different mechanisms like antibodies. They're looking at small molecules, different ways. We've really not shied away from any particular modality that we think would be helpful. So when we look at a drug like zolbetuximab, it's a monoclonal antibody. When we look at a drug like enzalutamide, which is our drug for prostate cancer, that's an androgen receptor inhibitor, what we would call a small molecule. And then a different modality is what we use with enfortumab vedotin, which is known as an antibody-drug conjugate. So one of the unique aspects is really using these different modalities where and how we think it would be most beneficial for patients.
Have you had much feedback as far as some of these trials were concerned after this presentation?
I think what has been remarkable is, and it's really very much appreciated within the gastric cancer world, the reception that we've received with these results for zolbetuximab. One of the discussants at one of our abstract presentations noted that this is one of the first targeted therapies in the last 20 years that's actually shown benefit and efficacy in patients with gastric cancer, advanced gastric cancer. So we really feel like we've discovered and are bringing forward something that is really on the cutting edge of really improving care. I think it's also important to note that gastric cancer is a global disease. Half of the world's gastric cancer occurs in China, and significant numbers of patients suffer from this disease in Eastern Asia as well. And our global trials actually included patients from all of these regions.
Now, we mentioned your oncology portfolio and how the data presented was going to affect it. What are some of the recent highlights for your oncology portfolio and the pipeline?
Maybe the other significant oncology update I'd like to share with you is for enzalutamide, which is a long-standing drug that we've had on the market for patients with prostate cancer. At the recent American Urological Association meeting, we had a presentation of the phase 3 EMBARK study. This was a study looking at a very early phase of prostate cancer, what's known as non-metastatic hormone-sensitive prostate cancer. And remarkably, this study showed that Xtandi in combination with androgen inhibitors, leuprolide as well in combination with Xtandi, actually was beneficial for these patients in delaying their metastases. And so that kind of result in that very early stage of prostate cancer really suggests that the use of enzalutamide might be useful for a whole new group of patients that we had not identified previously.
Anything that you'd like to add for our listeners, and then give us a website where we can learn more.
Sure. I think what I'd like for your listeners to appreciate is that our oncology group at Astellas is really committed to tackling the really difficult scientific challenges that exist with trying to treat cancers. We have looked at different modalities. We've also looked at different combinations of therapies. And we're really, I think, honed in on bringing forward therapies that are taking care of patients who really don't have other options at this point. And that's really, I think, what keeps a lot of us going to try to do this work successfully.
And a website where we can learn more.
You can learn more at Astellas.com. That's ASTELLAS.com.
Ahsan, I appreciate your time this evening. Thank you so much for joining us here on Health Professional Radio.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Neil.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dr. Ahsan Arozullah. Audio copies of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au, also at Anchor, Spotify, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.